Color management in DaVinci Resolve can be overwhelming, or maybe you don't even know yet what color management is. Well, in this video, I'm going to give you a proper understanding of how to set up color management in DaVinci Resolve for your vlog footage, what to do when you need to work with mixed footage, and how to handle plugins like Dehancer. But I'm no expert in this field, so I called in some help. So with me in this video is Daria Fissoun. Hi, Daria.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you. You may have seen her around on YouTube and events like ResolveCon. She's a colorist, compositor, and a certified DaVinci Resolve trainer. She's also the author of the Colorist Guide to DaVinci Resolve. So I think it's fair to say that she knows a thing or two about color and DaVinci Resolve. So welcome, Daria, once again. Did I miss anything in your introduction?
No, that's perfect. That's exactly what I am and what I do.
Yeah, great. All right. So, let's talk about color management for vlog in particular. And there's one thing I want to mention because many videos talking about color management in Resolve use footage shot with an ARRI or RED camera, all like high-end cinema cameras, usually stock footage. So that footage is not like representative for the majority of people shooting like prosumer cameras and vlog, like it's not very common in those videos. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make it specific.
And I think you're doing a great service to your viewers because color management can be very difficult to wrap your head around. And if you've got very specific settings or hardware that you're using, that just makes it even more hard, like more difficult to search for answers online, because like what are the chances someone has the exact like setup that you do? So I'm glad to look at the various approaches that we have for working with Panasonic VariCam footage.
Yeah, great. Oh, I want to mention something else. Because we are also going to talk about using plugins, and I have a Dehancer license to give away in this video. So later in the video, I'll explain how to have a chance to win it. So just want to quickly mention that.
Just a quick aside, there's a massive prize waiting for you at the end of the video.
Little giveaway. Yeah, exactly.
I like it. The Columbo approach, you know, I do that all the time.
Let me do this properly. If you don't know, Dehancer is a fantastic film emulation plugin with lots of great tools. And I've got a lifetime license to give away worth $449. And if you don't win the license, I have a 10% discount code for any license you purchase. I did a full review on Dehancer a while back. I'll link it up here. If you want to have a chance of winning this license, there will be a question later in the video. Send an email with the answer to this address, and I'll pick a random winner in 2 weeks from now.
All right, let me share my screen where I have assembled a project for us using your beautiful footage.
Quick note before we dive deep into color management. I had some technical issues using Riverside.fm. I described the issues in a pinned comment. And if anyone knows of a good alternative, please let me know. Also, there is so much good information in this video, but I was very nervous and humbled and stumbled over my words. So bear with me, keep watching, and don't forget the Dehancer giveaway.
Okay, so thank you for that introduction. As you mentioned, we're going to be looking at a few different scenarios of working with VariCam Panasonic footage. I've got a series of clips here. These are these direct recordings? Are they transcodes?
It's been shot in ProRes and exported in ProRes.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so this is what your viewers would be expecting to see if they're working with Panasonic footage then. Okay,
yes.
Cool. I just wanted to, like, in case the codec was going to stand out, I was going to call it out. Okay, well, let's keep going. All right, so the scenarios I want to talk about is basically like every setup I could think of for color management in Resolve, starting from no color management, so what you could do, what your options are, to using project-wide Resolve color management, which is generally my approach for a lot of my projects, but then also looking at an alternative that a lot of colorists use, which is using color space transform nodes, which will be clip specific as opposed to project-wide color management. And then we'll also look at ACES, right? So this is more of an industry level workflow. And again, we'll look at using it on a project-wide level, but then we'll also look at using ACES transforms to conduct our color management. So that way you can pick and choose what you need. And hopefully by explaining how we set them all up, you will maybe get a more like intuitive understanding of what's happening to the image signal and how to set up future projects for yourself. All right, so let's get started. Right now, we are looking at a project with a series of clips from a Panasonic camera. Really nice range of light and dark shots and colorful and flat. And we'll see what happens when they're properly color managed. Well, I'll show you my project settings as well. If I go into the color management tab, I can prove to you that we do not have color management enabled. And the reason is because to enable it, we have to change the color science to YRGB color managed. When it's set to YRGB, we're essentially working display referred, right? So that's how we describe a workflow in which the colors in the image are determined by the colorist based on what they're seeing in their display, right? Display referred. This is in opposition to scene referred workflows, right? So that's when you do enable one of the color management options. And what that refers to is the fact that the colors are actually mapped based on the camera's internal color space or color science, right? So they'll be mapped into a standard that you specify. Usually it's our monitoring standard, like Rec 709 Gamma 24. And therefore, the colors that you end up seeing upon like initial startup of the project will more likely, more closely match the scene captured in camera. And that's called scene referred workflows. So we'll be display referred for now. And I could, let's see, I've already changed my timeline color space to Gamma 24 because that matches my external monitor, my reference. But by default, it is set to scene, which is perhaps more appropriate for web deliverables. So if you're turning around for YouTube or for Vimeo, this is perfectly fine.
Okay.
This is just Gamma 24 with a forward OOTF applied. So it will be consistent when you export and upload to YouTube.
That's a really good tip. Lots of people struggle with that.
Yeah, I think it's really nice what the developers did here. If I hadn't touched this project at all and I launched it from scratch, these would have been the default settings. So basically, they've optimized the project for your average user, right? So the average user being someone who doesn't really know what color management is, let alone how to set up their project.
Yeah.
So it's meant to look nice for everyone. But then once you start to like work on more professional grounds, then you tend to learn about color management and you know exactly what you need to choose here. In my case, I'm just choosing Gamma 24 to match my Flanders monitor. All right. So yeah, all this just to say that I'm still in a non-color managed project, right? I'm just controlling how the signal is being fed to my monitor. That's it. So then in that case, what can we do with footage like this? If we're not color managing it, then we're deciding for ourselves how the colors are treated using the primary and secondary tools in the color page. So I could create contrast myself by dragging the master wheels, for example. And just basically working by eye, like trying to expose the footage the way I see fit based on the dynamic range that's been captured. I'm trying to expose like a good level of shadows using lift and gain master wheels. I can also like increase the saturation or the color boost. So I'm going to stick to saturation to keep it flat. And it's already looking quite nice, maybe a little bit like a touch green. So I'm just going to use the tint to push a little bit of magenta into the image. And then maybe warm it up if I want it to look warm, obviously, or like neutralize it, drag it left. But I think that takes away from the image a little bit. So I'll drag up the temperature too, brighten it up further. And that's it. So this is like display referred grading is when you're doing everything by eye. And as you can see, you can still get a really nice image. The only downside of grading from log without color management is that, when I increase the saturation, just now I used the saturation parameter, or even if I used color boost, in those cases, or at least in the case of the saturation parameter, the adjustment on the color intensity is going to be uniform across all the primaries and secondary color, I'm going to say color values, but basically across red, green, blue, and yellow, magenta, and cyan. If you were to look at this image in the vector scope, and it's hard to see because the trace is like quite faint, but as I increase saturation, it goes up really uniformly, right? The whole thing just goes,
Right.
Which is how saturation treats the image. But if you apply color management, you're never going to see a uniform increase in color intensity, right? Instead, what you're going to see, it looks a little bit more lopsided, right? So depending on which camera profile you're using, you might see that, for example, the green channel intensifies a little bit more strongly than, say, the blue, or the red. And the reason is because of that internal color science that the manufacturer designed. So they will have manufacturer LUTs, lookup tables, that will configure those colors accurately. And DaVinci Resolve has systems in place that will do that for you as well. Systems like RCM, Resolve Color Management, or ACES. So that way you get the colors exactly as they were intended to be captured by the manufacturer. And I think it's revealed most when you're working with skin tones. So I find like working directly off log like this with shots that feature people can be tricky because you lose some of the nuance in skin and people tend to come out maybe looking just a little bit flatter than they should. But yeah, otherwise, if I had no other option, I would still grade like this if I had to. When it comes to mixed footage, the same rule applies, so every clip that you're working on, you're starting from scratch. Since these are all log clips, I could just select them all. These are all the same v-logl clips. Select them. By the way, I just did that quickly, but I'm just holding shift to make a serial selection. And then I'm going to middle click clip number 1, replace existing grades. Yes, please. And as you can see, that one application that I've applied is not applicable to a lot of these shots because of the context of the scene, right? So there's like dark shots, high contrast shots. But in some cases, it works quite well. So I'd still have to do a lot of tweaking.
Yeah.
And by no means I've achieved like the actual location values. But yeah, this is a skill that's worth developing if you're ever going to be working with like unknown source footage or with archival footage, so you might have stuff coming in from like cameras from decades ago. It's still something you need to learn how to work with.
Yeah.
Anything? Oh yes, Sebastian, any comments?
So basically this way of working is like the least refined way.
Yeah, I think it's a very nice way of phrasing it. It's unrefined. Absolutely. So yeah, like I'm dragging back some of these values just to like protect the signal a bit more. And you can see it starts to look a lot better once we bring in the signal.
Yeah.
So the flowers as well. But again, we're just kind of like guessing as to what the best look is.
Yeah.
One final point I wanted to make though is that even if you are, doing it this way, you could still use Dehancer, right? So let's say you've gone through your timeline, you've adjusted all the colors, you've like balanced everything, matched the clips up. You can still drag your third-party effects, like Dehancer. I should probably just type the whole name. There we go. Click and drag it to attach it to the end of the pipeline. And I want the end of the pipeline because I don't want to be, performing things like balancing and matching on like the graded, the stylized footage. I'd rather do it at the cleanest point of the signal, which is when it looked like this, right? So cleanest and also gives us the most latitude for highlight recovery. And then at the very end, that's when we can get pretty aggressive with the colors and creative. All right, so let's see, what did I want to use for my settings? I want to make sure that my source, that should be fine for 709. We're on unmanaged at the moment. In fact, I'll keep that open. Anything else? I'll turn off the film profile, right, to make the colors just look a little bit more regular. And for the print setting a little bit lower, I'm going to change the profile from linear to like a really common one that people use when they're trying to make their footage look like film stock, which is Kodak 2383.
Yeah.
All right. That's a pretty common one. So that's what I'm going to be using for all the projects in this conversation. If it comes out looking a little elevated or bright, you could always come back to your previous nodes and further tweak the result. But I think that there's something to it, with the way that it's like exposed quite brightly, that I think works. And that's it. That's our workflow for non-color managed projects.
All
Do
right.
it by eye, by hand. Yeah.
And why, like for the exposure after you've applied Dehancer on the last node, why not do it like within the Dehancer plugin?
Absolutely.
Is there a benefit to either one of the options?
It's not. Yeah, I wouldn't say there's like that it's good or bad like in those terms. More about how you're targeting the tones. So yeah, absolutely. I could have used the exposure parameter in my print. I brought it down. But as you can see that this application is quite broad. So to me, it looks almost like a reverse gamma. It's targeting like the upper midtones, and then it's rolling off to the rest of the image. I could just use like more dedicated tools, like for example, the log wheels or the HDR
Yeah,
wheels.
right. So it's a bit it's more like a offset within Dehancer, like general offset.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
a good way to describe it. Well, I suppose like, offset will be even flatter than that. Like the entire waveform will just move like a uniform piece. There's definitely a very strong roll off in the exposure parameter, as you can see, but it is targeting the midtones much more strongly than the black or the white point. Those look like they're locked in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question though.
Cool.
All right. Shall we look at the second scenario? Shall we use color management?
Yeah, definitely.
So I did point out that this project is unmanaged, but to keep things simple, I created all of my other scenarios within the same project, and I'm color managing them on a timeline basis, which still gives you the same controls. So I'm going to select my second timeline. This will be RCM, and same starting position, right? It looks log. But this time I'm going to open my media pool where my timelines are stored, and I'm going to right click this timeline, go into the settings. And you can see right now it's just using the project settings that I have affecting the other timeline. I'm going to override those settings by unticking this box. And I'm going to change my color science to color managed. Wonderful. And our setting right now is automatic color management, which again, I find the automatic like tools, DaVinci Resolve to be quite well calibrated, right? So I will always recommend using them if you're not certain where you should be. But in our case, let's say we want to go for a more professional, more future-proof workflow. And I would like to set my color processing mode to DaVinci wide gamut, right? Which will allow us to work in a very wide space. Later on, I'll also talk about the Panasonic V-gamut, which is also a very wide space to work in. So you could equally use that as a working space. But the reason I'm not going to use it here is actually because of Dehancer. So I feel like, Sebastian, I should ask you, like, have you been able to set Dehancer to work directly with the Panasonic signal?
You mean from within Dehancer? No, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how to correctly set it up. I've tried different things. Set Dehancer to DaVinci wide gamut,
Yeah.
and yeah, I've been able to get some great results, but whether it's the correct setup, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. No, that's good because that's sounds like the solution I found. I know that Dehancer does have like a Panasonic camera profile,
Yeah,
but I don't think I could get the log to match, or maybe even the gamut. So I think maybe it just doesn't support Varicam at the moment. But yeah, so that's another reason I'm using DaVinci Wide Gamut as my project or working color space. So yeah, let's set this up to be a bit more advanced. I'm going to deselect automatic color management, change my color processing mode to DaVinci Wide Gamut, like so. And again, output will match my reference monitor, but you can change that if you're on a computer screen. You're probably going to want either Rec 709 scene. Gamma 2.2 is also a popular choice for computer screens, so it tends to be more accurate for that gamma output. It's also good for like suites that are not set up for color management. So if you're working like in an open office, for example, Gamma 2.2 tends to look more appropriate. sRGB is another very common one for computer screens, which for the most part tend to be sRGB displays. And then if you're on a Mac, then you want to look up your color profile in the settings and use that as your output color space. Okay, but that's good enough for me. If I wanted to be like really in depth about my setup, I could further expand my color processing mode by scrolling down to the bottom of this list and selecting custom, which will unpack the settings of whichever mode I currently have selected up here. So as you can see, I selected my timeline color space is DaVinci White Gamut. The working luminance is kind of like the main thing I want to talk about. So this is informing the luminance or nit values of the incoming footage, and it is rolling off the sort of the top end of the highlights, right? So these will be the extra bright elements in the nit values to the usually smaller standard that you're outputting to, like Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. So when the roll off does not occur, you end up with like really hot highlights, like they almost look clipped, even though you're starting with, logarithmic footage. So, it's just a little harder to fix. Like the information is still there, but then it requires a lot of tweaking. So with a higher working luminance, even a very, very bright image is going to roll off very cleanly. So I tend to raise this value pretty much as I can by going into custom and setting it to 10,000 nits manually. The only, in case you're wondering, like, what's the downside of taking it up, why not keep it low? There used to be a slight issue with the performance of the grading tools. And I say performance, like they didn't underperform or anything, but it just meant that the way that they were mapped to the footage was impacted. So then if you tried to make changes to the highlights, the tools almost became like, I don't want to say sensitive because it implies that you move them a little and it's too much, but it was the opposite. Like you had to drag the tools a lot in order to see any change in the waveform, so like the master wheel, you'd have to drag for ages. But that is no longer an issue. So you could just go ahead, set it to 10,000. The behavior of the tools will be mapped accordingly, and it will still feel the same under your fingers.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, I was avoiding 10. Like I tried it like when 17 came out. Like I remember trying it, and I'm like, oh, I don't know, it's a bit much. And then a few months ago, someone was like, no, it works now. No, it does. Okay, that's it. I'm not changing anything else for this project. I have no reason to. I'm going to click OK, and I want you to keep an eye in the viewer. Boom. So that is color management. It has taken the starting point of my footage, and it has mapped it into the Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 color space, while taking it through the working color space, which is DaVinci Wide Gamut. So if I was to relate what that looks like on the pipeline, the footage is all the way on the left. It's being mapped to DaVinci Wide Gamut over here. So then the entire time that we're working on this pipeline in the node editor, we are always in the DaVinci Wide Gamut. And then past the output, we then get mapped from DaVinci Wide Gamut to Rec 709. So this is a very wide sort of playground for us to work in. Anything I want to mention? Oh, yes. How do we know that the starting point of the footage is v-gamut or v-log? Well, we didn't specify it in the timeline color space because that doesn't allow you to specify just a single input, because obviously your sources could be coming from anywhere, right? Your footage. So you have to indicate it on the footage itself in your media pool. If I select all of these, I can right click and I can, actually, funnily enough, I cannot see the input color space because my project is not color managed at the moment. I feel like I should be able to bring it up in the metadata of the clips if I head on over to the media pool. And maybe if I turn on, whoa, that's wild. What's happening over here? I wonder what it's showing me right now. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to turn off this behavior, live media preview.
What I found is that it varies per page whether you have that input color space option Because in the cut page, you don't have that option, for example.
Well, yeah, I do feel like I see that behavior occasionally, and I'm always confused, like what prompts it. But I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure for me right now, it's because color management project-wide is disabled.
Okay. Yeah.
But yes, in the media page, so I was getting bizarre colors because it was showing me a timeline instead of my footage. Oh, right, because I am looking at a timeline here. Where is it? Back to deer. There we go. So if I don't have access to my input color space for any reason, I can usually see it in the column display of the metadata, of the media pool rather. And if I don't see it here, in the the default columns, I can right click and choose input color space. Oh, it's actually using project. Okay, let's see what the project is dictating. It's a little bit of a workaround, but I need to figure out what it thinks this footage is. So I'm going to disable automatic. I'm just going to jump into the custom settings. Oh, it thinks it's Rec 709 scene. All right, hang on. No, I don't think that's correct because we did see the footage correctly mapped
Yeah.
in this
did.
timeline, number 2 RCM. Oh, I made it needlessly complicated. I apologize for that, Sebastian. So I started running into other pages and I started looking in the media pool.
Yeah.
But actually, the answer was right in front of us all along. So if you right click on the clips in the timeline, you can see input color space.
Oh,
and
yeah. Right.
that is modifiable. So right now, it's set to Project Panasonic V-gamut v-logl. That's exactly what I want for my Vericam footage. If your project was set to something else, that's fine. You can override it by going to the Panasonic category here and choosing the one space that we have available. And that will set the correct input, and it will now map it to DaVinci Wide Gamut, which will then map it to Rec 709. Win, win, win. So we are now in the correct signal flow, the pipeline, and we can continue. So earlier I was talking about how during accurate mapping, the colors and the contrast will be adjusted according to the manufacturer's recommendations, right? So they're very specific values that they've set. So that's how you know you can trust the colors, and now you can work on them, both for balancing and matching, but also for creative looks, knowing that you are getting the most out of this signal, this video footage.
I also work this way. I set DaVinci Resolve up this way, the color managed way.
That's also my favorite ways. Yeah, project-wide color management.
Yeah.
Or in this case, timeline-wide, but yeah, same settings.
Yeah.
A common question I get is, what if you pick the wrong color profile in the input color space? Or simply, what if you don't know what your starting point is for the footage? So first of all, you want to avoid picking the wrong profile, right? So avoid guessing as much as possible, because with the wrong profile, it might not be immediately obvious, right, in the viewer, but you might end up compromising the clarity of the signal in some way. So, you might get like a close enough approximation and you look in the viewer and you think like, that looks pretty natural. I like the way the colors look. But then as you work on the footage and, you're trying to like do something in the highlights, or you're trying to like do the saturation in the colors, it might start behaving in an unexpected way, right? You might see clipping or crushing or blooming, like all these artifacts in the values that wouldn't have occurred if you had correctly treated the signal. So I usually avoid just guessing. I will just use the log state of the clip and grade it from that. So I know it's not perfect, but it's still a lot cleaner and safer than guessing an input color space. Also, like, try to find what the input could be from other sources. So if the footage came from a collaborator of yours, like a cinematographer, reach out to them and ask them what their camera is, what the color profile they were shooting on. Sometimes it will be visible in the metadata of a clip. So again, check in the media pool in the metadata panel. There are applications that can sometimes like read this information. Anything else? If you're using stock footage, that information will definitely be available on like the page that you downloaded it from.
Yeah.
And then if you're working with raw footage, you don't have to worry at all because DaVinci Resolve automatically detects raw and maps it for you. So you never even have to set it up. Win-win. All right. So this is all color managed. You'll see that it's still an ungraded clip with the gray outline, which means, like I said, you just do your usual grading from this point on. Like for me personally, I would probably still like treat the contrast a little bit in the shot, see how the exposure works like in a few different ranges. Yeah, maybe push up the colors, make it warmer. In the end though, we're still adding Dehancer at the end of the pipeline, right? Any of our plugins that we may have installed. So let me introduce my effects. Dehancer is still filtered in my search, which is good. And again, by default, it comes with this Kodak Vision 3 profile. I'm gonna
it's pretty. The preset is pretty pretty heavy.
It's
the
pretty heavy.
Dehancer,
I've seen some setups where it's already set up properly in the input, so it looks a little gentler. But yeah, like when you first see it like that, it's like, whoa, that's free. Let's change the profile to 2383. And I also want to look at my source because it's no longer 709. We are now working in DaVinci Wide Gamut, right? I was explaining to you what the signal, how it was behaving. So we need to change our source to DVR Wide Gamut Intermediate. And now it looks a lot gentler. And I think the Vision 3 probably won't look so dramatic either. It looks more like film stock now. Okay, so there we go. Nice clean signal. Obviously, you can keep modifying Dehancer as much as you like to your heart's content. It is a creative plugin after all.
Yeah.
Then if you went into earlier nodes, you can adjust things like contrast, make the image sharper if you wanted to. You could pivot the contrast to bring out details in the midtones. And yeah, all good. If you have mixed footage, just like we were able to set up the input color space of this one clip, let's say this clip came from a different source. I can right click and set it to a different camera if I wanted to. And the beauty behind color management is that even with all these different sources, they're all being mapped to a single working color space. And then that color space is mapping to your deliverable or your monitor. So the idea, the whole idea behind color management is that after you set it up, you're grading all the clips as if they're like on an even level. You don't have to even consider their sources so much anymore, unless it's for matching purposes.
Yeah. So even if you have Rec 709 clips, like a shot in a natural 709 profile, you can right click and say this is Rec 709, and you will be working on it in the same space, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. A couple of places to find 709 is up here, but these are two pretty specific gamma treatments. So if you want to go for like the more classic, like gamma 2.2 or 2.4, you can find that in the miscellaneous section at the bottom. Also, I just saw this and I realized like, yeah, the clips all still look log in the clip's timeline representation. So I can right click these and update my thumbnails so they look more like their current state, which is the color managed one.
Oh, cool. I did not know that.
Is that going to take a second? Why didn't it do it though? Do it. That is interesting. It should have updated. Is it because we're color managing on a timeline level? I didn't think that was going to be a factor. Oh, that's so annoying. I just showed you something and then like it's not working.
Well,
and I've never
maybe
seen
it's a bug.
It's the first time, yeah, that it's just like refused.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah, maybe it's a bug. Are you on 18.6? Yeah, you are, right?
I'm 18.6, but I'm like a couple of subversions behind. I've not updated for a little while. That is so strange. I've literally never seen it do that, unless I just need to wipe my cache or something. Delete render cache. Do it. And update. All right. Well, never mind that. You can. I don't know if maybe you could do like a separate recording showing the same tip, but like.
Yeah, I will.
It actually works.
I will.
Okay, perfect. Let's keep going. So that was a second demonstration on a project-wide level. Let's talk about using color space transform instead. It's a very popular choice amongst colorists. So I've got a third timeline for that. Okay, once again, we're returning to a non-color managed project. So we've got no color management occurring on the timeline itself. If I look in the settings, You could see these are just using the original settings from the project over here, which had no color science enabled. And yeah, what I'm going to do instead is color manage the clips purely in the node pipeline using color space transform nodes. So I'm going to open up my effects and turn my search off. And this will be found in the Resolve Effects color category. You can see there's a color space transform effect right over here. You can drag it in. And I'm going to actually start naming things as I should have been doing from the beginning. Okay. So the layout here looks pretty similar to what we saw in the project settings, right? So it's anticipating an input, an output, and giving us some tone mapping controls. If I wanted to accomplish everything in just one node, I could. So I'll move the CST to the end, and my starting point will be the Panasonic V-gamut, right? Gamut is a reference to the primaries, or the color of the footage. And then the gamma will be the luminance, or the tone range. So that would be Panasonic V-logl. Right, so that's already looking very good. I think, what is it outputting to? It's probably already outputting to, yeah, gamma 2.4. So that's pretty much exactly where the signal needs to be. You can leave it alone, or you can set it to gamma 2.4 so you are certain that it's going out correctly. And the beauty of this kind of setup, well, actually, I'm going to differ from saying beauty, because I was about to say, like, well, you can change your deliverables, but you can do that on a project level, and that's probably even more convenient, because then you just have to change the one setting and then output as many times as you like. Here, if you're doing it on a clip by clip basis, you will have to update all your clips to a new deliverable output,
Right.
unless you create another CST on a timeline level. And that's a little easier to manage. So actually, I should have done it up here. There it is. So then have a single CST on the timeline where you're mapping it to your deliverable. But either way, you will have to place it at the end of the pipeline, because it means that this conversion is occurring right before the signal appears in the viewer and essentially exits DaVinci Resolve via the deliver page when you render it out. So the reason why this is important, my deliver page is taking a second to update. There we go. So that is what the output is sending. When you're doing all of your grading work, whether you're using, the tools that come with DaVinci Resolve, whether you're using plugins or LUTs, you want all of that to be happening in the extra wide Panasonic V-gamut, right? You don't want to be working on a more shrunk down version in Rec 709.2.4. And in fact, let me just double check if there's anything else I want to mention here. Yeah, that's fine. I think, like, for all of these clips, right, if I was to reuse this CST, it will work very well. I'm going to select all of these, middle click the first clip. And then it is just standard color management across all of these. This is very nice.
And is this giving like the exact same result as working color managed? Like, does it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's exactly the same, right?
It is exactly the same, but you'll notice some of the parameters are slightly different. So it's the fact that you have this max input and max output controls over here for tone mapping. On a project-wide level, I go into my custom settings. Here, instead, you have like input DRTs and output DRTs. And I'm pretty happy with the way that these perform instead. I feel like I always get a really nice, clean, rolled off signal, right? But what did I want to mention as I was looking through these? So basically, like, yes, the overall performance is the same, but you have access to different aspects of the setup of this color transformation. And I feel like I'm happy with what I get over here. If I ever do need to go deeper into the signal and do something special, I can just choose to, override. I want to say I want to override color management. I don't want to start giving bad advice, but if I felt like some footage came in and I'm like, you know what, I can see that some of these clips are going to present issues further down the line. So this may not be compatible with a project-wide color management. I'd rather, separate these into CSTs and address their individual concerns, then that's where I would break it down into CSTs. But there's actually a lot of reasons why you choose between one or two of the two options. I think it's for the most part, personal preference. So I think I should have that whole last bit was just like maybe too much.
No, it's cool. So as far as I know, you can also, like when you work in a color managed workflow, bypass that color management for a particular clip and put on a CST instead.
Well, that's what I was just about to say, and then I realized, can you? Because I'm not seeing that option. Oh wait, because the color management's not enabled here. That's why. So yes, you can bypass. There we go. Now that the color management is on in this timeline, there it is. And then manage it individually. Yeah. So get CST to do. So that's actually very a bit much tidier way of presenting it. All right. So yeah, we're back in technically a non-color managed timeline, except by the CSTs on the clips themselves. So yeah, like why would you sometimes want to have this additional control? For the most part, the exposure in these clips looks really, really good. We have like pretty dynamic range. In this clip, if I thought that it was looking a little flat, I could maybe choose to increase my max input. And again, it comes down to this idea of the standard or the knit range that we believe we're starting from and what we're mapping it to. So if I feel that the overall signal is just getting a little bit too rolled off, too compressed, I can raise my max input. So 100 is pretty strong. This is basically without like the timeline luminance. This is what all log footage would look like if it was just directly managed through X709 without roll-offs. I am going to increase this to assume that the incoming signal, the input, has a knit value of 200, right? And get it to roll out from 200 to 100 on my screen. So I can either drag the slider here, or I can just enter the value 200. Okay, and now I have slightly less roll off on the highlights, which is giving me like these nice like specular highlights where the sun is hitting the deer. And if I turn this parameter off, you can see this is what we had before, and this is what we had after, right? So, and that's because it works really well for this particular shot because it doesn't have like these extra bright elements like a lot of these other shots do. If I use 200 on this one, for example, I'm probably just going to end up with a very blown out lamp.
Yeah.
So, I mean, unless aesthetically that's what you wouldn't go for, but it doesn't look purposeful. It just looks blown out. Whereas the original, we've captured it with so much dynamic range that we're able to roll it off all the way to revealing the light bulb inside of the lamp, which is great. Same thing here. I think 200 wouldn't work because you're shooting directly into, if that's not sunlight, at the very least, it's like the sun being reflected off a glass surface.
Yeah.
Again, a little too hot. It starts to look like camcorder footage.
Yeah.
So you want that roll off, right? That gentle treatment. But here, it's actually quite advantageous. So that's, I think, one of the benefits of using like CSTs.
Interesting.
Yeah. I know that a lot of colorists, when they first started using color management in DaVinci Resolve, they exclusively used CSTs because like of the allowances that they granted them, and also because like project-wide, maybe Resolve Color Management had still some tweaking to do, right, to get to the state that it is right now, like a much, much more powerful engine. So they've just gotten used to using CSTs. I feel for a lot of colorists, it's a matter of habit. But whatever you prefer to use, I say go for it. Anything else? Yeah, we're still doing everything in one node, but I do want to show you a 2-node solution as well.
Cool.
And but just before I move on, I want to say that this is a perfectly fine working environment because of how close Panasonic V-gamut is to any other wide gamut that we have out there. So this is actually not too far off from working in ACES AP1 or working in DaVinci wide gamut, right? So Panasonic, perfectly fine. You don't have to like arbitrarily map it to a wide gamut, like DaVinci Resolve or ACES. Right. Which we're about to do.
That's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, I found a white paper as evidence. So if you want to post that in the chat, in the description of the video.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So Panasonic have published white paper about the Varicam format. And they've even mapped out the gamut on the CIE graph. There we go. I love diagrams like this. So the horseshoe that you're seeing here is basically representing the visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, right? So AKA, it's just all visible light. And within this horseshoe, we tend to show the primaries of various like displays, monitors, or different standards or capture devices, right? So we're indicating the intensities of red, green, and blue that can be captured, and that informs the gamut of that standard. So Rec 709 tends to be always generally the smallest triangle in these diagrams, in these comparisons. We've got ACES. You can see a gigantic triangle that's essentially swallowing up the CIE graph. So it's not meant to be visible by human eyes. It's just meant to be like a map that can be mathematically like calculated to other smaller standards, right? So it's purely there for calculation purposes. But that's not even AP1. This is AP0, right? AP1, it's not in this diagram, but it's very close to this red triangle, which is the V-gamut, which is Panasonic. So as you can see, it's absolutely enormous. And it can definitely be mapped to Rec 709, to 2020, which is also 2100. So that's UHD and HDR. And you've also got P3 DCI, which is your digital cinema deliverables. You can see all of these are smaller triangles than V-gamut. So yeah, you're pretty much working really in an extra wide space. If you wanted to compare these, by the way, on your own workstation, because I can show you also what like the DaVinci wide gamut looks like in comparison to Panasonic. You can check it out in the CIE chromaticity diagram down here. If I pop it out, there we go. I'll just set it to just the scopes.
That's I am learning so much.
So right now you're just seeing Rec 709. So I can see how the image is like how well presented it is on a standard like broadcast display on a television set. If this was like smushed for some reason, like on one of the edges or the corners, that would then tell me that there's a chance that the colors are being compromised. So if I look at the image here, it's obviously very saturated, but it's also telling me that I cannot see the nuances from, between green to yellow to orange to red, which means that there might be something like blooming or artifacting.
And so you're losing information basically because it falls outside of what it can display.
Exactly. Like it doesn't like necessarily mean that the signal is going to be bad. It just means that you can no longer see the nuances like between those values. So if I bring my saturation down, you can see that it was meant to be like 3 little fires. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can do to kind of work around it, but just so you know, it's okay if there's like a little bit of just like against the wall. Anyway, what I wanted to show you was in the settings, you have the ability to bring up like another gamut to compare, what it would look like against the one that you're working in, because that's our output right now, 709. I can change that to ACES. So 0, you saw that was the big triangle. There's also AP1, which is what you usually work in when you're working in the ACES system. And there you can see it's still within the triangle. If we compare that to Panasonic, V-gamut, see, they're almost the same.
Oh yeah, they're almost the same, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's also DaVinci wide gamut. So it's
Which
bigger.
Is massive.
It's massive, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of between maybe AP0 and AP1. But it's compared to 709, right? They're all three of them are substantially larger. So yeah, you're good. You're good to work in Panasonic on its own. Let me collapse this.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I've shown you that it's okay to work like this if you want to, but one of the limitations could be that if you're working with like plugins, again, like external programs, they may not always support Panasonic as a color space. So then you pretty much have to map into a space that is supported. And ACES tends to have pretty broad cross-platform support. DaVinci wide gamut is also like getting picked up by quite a lot of applications. Since we're talking about Dehancer, we're using that as like maybe the case study in this video.
Yeah.
Dehancer does support DaVinci wide gamut, so I'll show you how to set it up. Let's go. I am going to, let's see, we'll just move the CST to the left. And instead of outputting it to my end standard, I'm going to set it to my working color space, right? So it's like an intermediary space that we're going to be living in. And I'm going to choose DaVinci White Gamut, and I'm going to choose DaVinci Intermediate. It should barely look different. Oh, actually, let me reset this as well. I don't want to have funky tone mapping.
Oh, yeah.
So that should be enough. So it should barely change from the Panasonic log, right? If I turn it off and on, it's a very mild shift and it still looks log, because remember, we're just mapping from this really big triangle to a slightly bigger triangle. But neither of those is meant to represent human vision. So that's why we need a second CST. And CST, maybe say that's an output, that's an input. There we go. And I can even just copy and paste this across and then swap my values. And then all I have to do is just change my output color space and gamma. So that's Rec 709, gamma 24. These are already set using my timeline color space. And just like with the previous example, I can choose to increase my max input to like maybe bump up the roll off on the nit values, right? So if I'm using custom max input, like it is assuming that the footage is like several thousands of nit values, that we're gently rolling off. So it's a very conservative treatment of highlights. Here I'm saying, hey, just, be a bit kind of like assume a smaller nit value so I see more detail in the highlights.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's it. So now we've designed our own working space in the node editor. So CST in will always be the very first node in this pipeline. And then CST out, why is this one called CST in? Did I just name them the same exact thing? There we go. It's because I copy pasted.
Yeah.
Should have renamed it. This will always live on the very end of the pipeline because everything beyond this is going to be a 709 signal, right?
Yeah.
So that you want that to be your deliverable. And everything else you want to do, again, balancing, matching, creative looks, secondaries, tracking, all of that happens in this space in the middle.
In between. Yeah.
And any effects will usually be placed at the end. If you've got mixed footage, there's your CST in, just change your input color space. And if you're working with one node, one CST, it's the same thing. Just change your input to whatever the camera is. Sebastian, I feel I interrupted you.
No, you didn't interrupt me.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Sorry, I get into the zone and then I hear you saying something and I'm like, I just finish the sentence and I'll hear what you have to say.
No, you're doing great. It's I'm enjoying it, learning a lot, and it's great. So keep on going.
Okay, cool. All right. Hopefully this signal makes sense. So just to reiterate what's happening here is we're outputting the DaVinci White Gamut Intermediate, which means that the next CST has to start from that exact same point to complete the map.
Yeah.
Right. So DaVinci White Gamut Intermediate, boom, and to the end. So it's a two-step process.
Yeah. So if we now put Dehancer in, you were just going to say that.
Well, perfect. No, this exactly leads me to my next point, which is adding effects. I'm going to switch to library in the effects panel, and I'm going to look for Dehancer. Drag and drop it in. Again, we'll get a really powerful look here in Kodak Vision 3. I'm going to change my source to match my working color space, DaVinci White Gamut Intermediate. And then I'm going to change my print to whatever I'd like it to be. Here it's 2383. And pretty much the same result we had earlier. Now, this time it does get a bit blown out because of, I suppose, trying to figure out actually why it gets blown out. I think it's because of a slightly different approach to the tone mapping compared to what happens in the DRT of like the project-wide color space management. So in this case, I thought it actually worked well to fix it using the exposure parameter in the Dehancer node. Just drag it down and look at that. Perfect.
Yeah.
Get all these values. And then you could still use secondary controls to, further massage the signal. So if you want the midtones to be brighter so you can see the deer better, that's fine. But maybe it's your aesthetic choice. Keep it like that and it looks really nice.
It does.
Dehancer look. Yeah. Suppose alternatively, Just set my CST in max like output to a lower range. So even setting it to 100 actually works pretty well. So the output is determining how the signal is leaving the node. And before that, it was like in the intermediate gamma, which is a pretty unique treatment of the transfer function of the signal. By setting it to 100, it becomes closer to Rec 709. So the result is a bit more predictable. It was what we saw earlier in the other examples. Yeah, when we're outputting to 709. Cool. But I think I like the exposure result better, actually, like looking at it now.
Yeah, it looks good. Yeah. So, and just to make that clear to people, anything you do like before you apply an effect, you do before that node where you applied the effect, right? So in this case, before Dehancer, but after the first CST.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tried to keep it open like that just so you could see visually, like this is our working area still.
Yeah.
You don't really want to do any kind of like fine tuning or corrective work after the fact, because now you're working on top of this, like, in a sense, distorted signal of the footage, which is fine. It's fine to distort it if you're doing it for creative purposes, like with purpose. In fact, that's why the name of the tool is Dehancer, because you're not enhancing the footage, you're dehancing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, fix it all here. And let's see if it will work this time. So to upgrade the thumbnails.
Oh yeah.
Timeline. Let's see. I'm gonna right click, choose update all thumbnails. Oh, you son of a! I have no idea. It's something about today, isn't it? It just doesn't want to play along. All right. So just two more quick examples, if you don't mind. I think we've covered like the heaviest part of this, like about, especially talking about gamuts, which I think is important.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to the question for the Dehancer giveaway. So Daria, what's the question?
Question is, if you're using two color space transform nodes to manage your signal, where would you place a plugin like Dehancer for optimal image quality? Would it be before the first CST, between the two CSTs, or after the second CST?
Again, send an email with the answer to this address, and I'll pick a random winner in 2 weeks from now. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. I'm in the process of uploading all my videos to Patreon, so you can watch them ad-free. And you can also download things like sample footage and conversion LUTs. And there's more to come. It would be a big support and much appreciated.
Let's look at ACES. All right, I'm going to open my project manager. I have a special project for ACES in particular. I'm going to double click, head on over. I'm in a new timeline once again. And I'm going to open up my project settings, going to color management. And I didn't have ACES on. I already had ACES on, so let me turn it off so I can demonstrate it being enabled. So let me turn it off. Still not updating, but this time it's showing me like the the managed clips. Never mind. Okay, so this is an ACES project. Well, I've called it that, but I haven't enabled ACES color management just yet. All right, I'm going to go into my color science. And I have two ACES options, right? ACES CC and CCT. Neither of these are going to impact your actual color management. These are informing how your grading tools are going to operate within DaVinci Resolve on the color page. So CC implies that you're going to have like a more computationally like pure Cineon logarithmic curve. So that's, it's like a more of a computerized approach, whereas CCT is going to apply a roll-off to the toe of the image. So I've been talking a lot about roll-offs in the highlights, but this will be the toe, so the lower midtones and the shadows. And a lot of colorists prefer it because it feels more like you're working with film scans, right? So not that same logarithmic approach. So it's up to you, but again, the color management does not get affected. So I'm going to choose.
No, but you will get different results
when grading.
With the tool, when grading. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. All right.
All right. I'll choose ACES CC. So the ACES input transform will have to be your camera. So by default, I think these are both no. no input, no output. I'm going to change my input transform to Panasonic. What is it? To V35. And I'm going to set my output transform to Rec 709. So you can see the setup is a little bit more simplistic, but that's because ACES as a color management system tends to be more hardwired when it comes to color standards and color spaces in particular. So it has a very distinct idea of what any standard is, right? The gamma and the transfer function, the gamut and the transfer function are already like combined as a color space. And that's what you're selecting. It's just the color space itself. You don't have as much customization or mobility as you have in Resolve color management. So I think this is why it is popular on an industrial level, is because if you're sending someone Rec 709, like that, it will always have the same transfer function. You're not going to mess it up. So yeah, we'll keep these as they are. Pretty simple, straightforward. I click save, and automatically all the clips get color managed, so I can go through them. We indicated our input on a project-wide level, so they're all impacted. But if you're working with mixed footage, you can always right-click one of the clips, and instead of it being called input color space, as it was with Resolve color management, it's called ACES input transform. And you can still find, there it is, we've got Panasonic or any other camera that's supported. Okay. With correction, it's all the same workflow, right? So you do your corrective steps first, you address your secondaries, and then you apply your creative looks at the end. If you're using plugins like Dehancer in this example, I'm going to apply it to the end of the pipeline. And once again, turn off this film look. I'm going to set up the source. And when we're setting the source, we need to indicate the working color space, right? So it's not the input nor the output. In our case, it will be ACES. So I've got ACES CCT actually. So you know what, that kind of informs me what my project color space should be as well. So let me go back out. I feel it shouldn't impact it so much, but let's try it out. CCT, save. Yeah, it hasn't really changed anything in the viewer. All right, so that's our source, and it's already mapped Dehancer to work correctly. I can now enable my print profile, 2383. So same result as we've been getting with all the other examples, which is a good sign.
This ACES workflow basically works the same as the DaVinci Resolve color managed workflow, just with a different sort of standard, right?
Yeah, it's a different standard. You may have noticed that there's no like working color space. Like in Resolve, it's always, input, timeline, output. Here you only have input and output because ACES itself is the working color space that you're in. Yeah, the CC or CCT. So we talked about mixed footage. You just right click, change a new ACES input transform. And if you are curious about like all these different models of ACES, so like I mentioned AP0 and AP1 earlier. I also talked about CC, CCT. There's also ACES CG for working with compositors or like jumping into Fusion. So I can give you another resource. So I can send you the link to that later on. But ACES very helpfully publishes all these things and describes, in quite a bit of detail what they all do, what they're intended for. Quite handy. All right, the last demo is also pretty quick. I'm going to jump to a new timeline once again. So this is to demonstrate ACES transform workflows. So ACES transform is basically the ACES equivalent of the CST node. It allows you to, on a clip-by-clip basis, override or set up color management, but do it within the pipeline rather than on a system level. So I'm going to open up my ACES transform timeline over here, and I'm going to go into my media pool for this timeline, go into the settings. Okay. And usually this is enabled, which means that the project settings are being used on any timeline. But in my case, I'm going to disable this. And we were previously set to CCT. I can just set it to DaVinci YRGB so that we are once again display referred. And that means that we are not color managing the project, or in this case, the timeline. All right, anything I want to set up here? I will change my timeline CCT, but this is only to inform the operation of my grading tools. It's not actually to perform any any color management on the video. All right, and then for the output, whatever my standard is, in this case, it's always Rec 709 Gamma 24. Perfect. So this is just for the benefit of the tools. And I'm going to click OK. So then with this CST example, I showed you that you could use one and still get good results. Here it's the same case. Like you can use ACES transform, that's what it's called. And in fact, I'll show you without searching because it's found in the same place as color space transform. It's just a few effects away in the same list. So you could set your input to something like Panasonic VariCam. And I believe it's a little tricky because when you type in Panasonic, you do get one result, but it's not the one you need, confusingly. If I start typing Panasonic, it takes me to V35. No, my friends, what you want to select is the one that's nearer the bottom, Panasonic VariCam. And it even says v-logl, v-gamma, so you know that's the correct one. And then the output to whatever it is you're outputting to, and that's already set up correctly. Let me make a larger viewer. But again, I suppose you can already work in this standard as long as you're applying all your changes before the ACES transform, but can be limiting for plugins that don't support Panasonic as a standard, like Dehancer. So actually, apologies to Dehancer, by the way, if there is a way to set it up and I'm just getting it wrong, because there is a V35 standard, but for some reason I'm getting like an unexpected result. But yeah, let me show you the 2-node solution, an input and an output, just like with CSTs. I am going to, just move this to the front. And we are going to, whoa, that was loud. Send it to ACES CCT. All right, so that will be my ACES in. I'm going to copy, make a new node, paste. This will be my ACES out. And then I'm going to map it from the previous state of the signal, CCT, to whatever my deliverable is, Rec 709. Now I can do my grades. If I have mixed footage, change my input transform in the ACES in node. And then in the library, if I bring in the plugin, like so, again, you just have to ask yourself, what state is the signal in when the Dehancer node is on it, right? And we know that we just mapped it to CCT, and that's it. All set up.
Yeah, so that basically works the same way as with a CST, but a different standard again.
Absolutely. Yeah. That pretty much takes me, it exhausts my knowledge of Panasonic footage setups.
You did an amazing job at preparing this. Wow. It's really cool. I really appreciate it. This is going to be super helpful for many people. And
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right. I think we made it through.
Oh, Sebastian, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I had a blast. It was a pleasure with this type of footage. And I feel like I learned a bunch of things while I was looking through your footage and finding out best case workflow setups for it. So yeah, it's quite fun. I mostly get footage in a raw format. So in a way, I'm spoiled because I don't have to factor in inputs as much.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope to see you again, maybe next year at IBC. And good luck in everything you do.
You too, Sebastian.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.